Jews, Muslims, and Christians can live on the land, but only as equal citizens before the law and not as superior citizens. You know, anytime now, Mr. Lieberman will be arriving here. Hillary Clinton will have to kiss him. Who is this Lieberman? Avigdor Lieberman, the foreign minister of Israel, intends to make every non-Jewish citizen of Israel, passport holders, to sign an oath accepting that Israel is a Jewish state. Can you imagine black Americans being asked to sign an oath that America is a white state? It's a preposterous idea, to borrow a word from that video. It's an obscene idea. Even the grand wizards of the Ku Klux Klan wouldn't dare to advance such a proposition. And yet that's the basis on which Lieberman was elected and is now the foreign minister of Israel. And when he comes here, a red carpet will be rolled out for this racist murderer, whilst the elected leadership of the Palestinian people are called terrorists, and people are given a license to hunt them down and, if possible, to kill them. This is the monstrosity of this picture. This is the insult which is added to the injury of having lost their land, been scattered around the world. The Palestinians, as the victims of terrorism, are called the terrorists, and Israel, which is the terrorist, are called the victims of terrorism. This is a perversion of the English language itself. George Orwell in his epic novel 1984 described when he wrote it, he was imagining a future when the English language itself would be perverted. When peace would be called war, war would be called peace, lies would be called truth. We've reached this situation now when victims of terrorism are branded as terrorists, and those who support the victims have the FBI in their meetings looking to see if we step out of line. Well, I promise you that what I'm going to propose this evening does not break any US laws. We will not be breaking any laws of this country. I just say it's a pity that those fundraising for Israel are not subjected to the same forensic examination as those of us involved in Palestine. Now, the latest of my long lifetime of involvement with the Palestinians began when I watched, as you watched, the 27th December massacres unleashed by the State of Israel on the defenseless people of Palestine in the Gaza Strip. This was almost unique in the annals of modern warfare. Normally, when a people are bombed, the civilians can run away, can hide, can become refugees. In this case, in Gaza, 25 miles long, 3¼ miles wide, the largest concentration camp on the earth. The people who did the bombing took the precaution of locking all the doors so the people had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. A people who had no air force, no anti-aircraft guns, no navy, no tanks, no heavy weapons, were shot like sitting ducks, were shot like fish in a barrel, were subjected to a merciless bombardment for 22, 23 days. 1,400 Palestinians were killed. 1/5 1,400 Palestinians were killed, the vast majority of them women and children. Thousands were maimed and orphaned. Hundreds had to have a limb amputated. Scores had to have 2 limbs amputated. And dozens, believe it or not, had to have 3 limbs amputated. And they don't even have wheelchairs in Gaza to be pushed around. This massacre that we saw, as long as we didn't have to depend on Fox News or Sky News or the Bush and Blair Corporation of what used to be the BBC, we were able, if we had access to Al Jazeera, to Press TV, for which I present 2 programs every week, if we had access to the internet, to YouTube, we saw the crimes that were committed, and we listened for a word from the world to try to bring it to a halt. Let me tell you about white phosphorus. We saw the white phosphorus gas being dropped on a civilian population that had been locked up. Imagine something calling itself, though we don't accept it, the Jewish state, dropping gas on civilians, dropping gas on the United Nations in Gaza. We saw the pictures, don't deny it. We saw the pictures of the gas falling on United Nations schools and warehouses, clinics. We saw the United Nations drivers murdered on their way to deliver food and medicine to the victims of this aggression. The United Nations had an inquiry into this series of crimes. They concluded that Israel was guilty of war crimes. And the president of Israel himself, Shimon Peres, the president of the state, announced to the United Nations, and I quote, that Israel does not accept one single word of this report. I'm asking, here in New York, how come Israel is allowed to continue to be a member of the United Nations when it defies every decision that the United Nations makes? I know about white phosphorus. I happened to be in Beirut with Arafat when Israel began its invasion of Lebanon in 1980. I went to the hospitals. I saw the children, victims of white phosphorus, the first time Israel used it. I saw the white smoke coming from their noses and their mouths as they cooked to death inside. That's what happens when you breathe this white phosphorus. You can't breathe it out until you're dead, until you have baked to death from the inside. We saw that little girl, if we had Al Jazeera, 3 years old, like the little child I had on my knee just a few minutes ago, held up to the camera, her face blackened by flames, having laid out dead for 3 days in Zaytuna on the edge of Gaza City. The cameraman held her up, dead, minus her arm and her leg, which had been eaten by the dogs that were roaming the rubble of Gaza in the killing fields of those days. We read the report in the English Guardian of the baby that was found dead, still suckling on the toe of her dead mother. Keep that image in your mind. A dead baby suckling on the toe of her dead mother. The next time you hear some Brooklyn accented barbarian as a spokesman for Israel on television telling you that they're the only democracy in the Middle East, what kind of democracy is it that murders children and gasses civilians, having locked them up for the duration? And we saw The little girl, aged 10, keep that in your mind, standing in the rubble of her house, one of the 61,200 Palestinian houses that were destroyed in 22 days. I don't know how many houses there are in Brooklyn, but just imagine going out tonight and finding 61,200 houses had been destroyed by aerial bombardment. This little girl had been staying with her grandmother, and when she heard that her house had been bombed, they went there to discover that her mother and her father and all 5 of her brothers had all been killed by these bombs. I interviewed this little girl just a few weeks ago, standing in the rubble, and she said something to me which broke my heart, and I have to say it to you. She asked me this: where is this Arab world that they teach us about in school? Where is this Ummah that they teach us about in the mosque? Why did they leave us alone? She said, tears running down her face. Why did they leave us alone to face this? What did we do to deserve this? Who is this Lieberman? Avigdor Lieberman, the foreign minister of Israel, intends to make every non-Jewish citizen of Israel citizen, being asked to sign an oath that America is a white state. It's a preposterous idea, to borrow a word from that video. It's an obscene idea. Jews, Muslims, and Christians can live on the land, but only as equal citizens before the law and not as superior citizens. Passport holders to sign an oath accepting that Israel is a Jewish state. Can you imagine black Americans? You know, anytime now, Mr. Lieberman will be arriving here. Hillary Clinton will have to kiss him